closing down some of my windows here because I noticed a little drag on there too. So,
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. We're live now, so we can get started.
okay.
So welcome everyone to our Native Wellness Power Hour. We are in week 36, and today is our 221st Native Wellness Power Hour. So that's so hard to believe. But my name is Jillene Joseph, and I'm the Executive Director of the Native Wellness Institute. And I'm happy to bring to you our show today, which is on generosity and decolonization. So before we get going, I just want to make a few announcements that our staff is taking a break this week. So we're not going to have a power hour tomorrow or Friday. And we're going to spend time with our families, giving thanks and just taking a little bit rest and doing our own self-care. And then we will start back with our 222nd power hour on Monday. So please tune back in Monday, and always remember that all of the power hours can be found on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. So if you're looking for things to binge watch, you can go to YouTube and check out 220 power hours. And today I'm super honored and super excited to have our special guest, Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who now is across the medicine line, north of the medicine line at the University of Manitoba. So welcome, Michael. Would you just like to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Michael Yellowbird. I am a dean and a professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. I am from the 3 affiliated tribes in North Dakota, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and the Rikara. And I've been here on Treaty 1 territory for a little over a year now. So, and I'm really enjoying being here in Canada.
Nice.
As I look south to see what's going on in south. So.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a good time to be in Canada. Oh gosh. So, you know, today here we are on the eve of the US, our Thanksgiving holiday. And of course, as tribal people, everybody refers to it in different ways, right? And we celebrate it in different ways. And what it made me think of is just the power of gratitude and how that's tied to decolonization. And I wanted to specifically today focus on decolonization because I think in academia, and for those of us doing healing work from, historical and intergenerational trauma, it's a word that we've been, used to. But lately, like especially in the last few years, I see it a lot more, right? And so I just want to have a conversation and ask you, from your perspective and your research and studies and experience, like, what does decolonization mean to you?
Okay, thanks. That's really a big question. I think I've written a lot about it, published quite a bit about it, and I am still in the process of conceptualizing it and in all of its different features. I think a lot of people approach it from a political standpoint, decolonization. Then some people are now beginning to approach it from a more biological standpoint. I've been working with some scholars. We just finished an article called Molecular Decolonization that was published a couple of months ago. So I'm looking at it in that way. But in order for me to really understand it, my work, what I've had to do is I really try to focus on, what colonization means. Mm-hmm. When I think about colonization, I think about how colonization has, a number of different sort of ways to view it. I mean, we think about colonization of people in terms of an invasion of another group of people and colonizing them by putting, different kinds of ideas and beliefs and so on and that sort of thing. But it's really very similar to what happens in bacterial colonization too, as well, and even viral and fungal colonization, and even a viral colonization of the body. In order to get to decolonization, we have to understand, really what's happening in terms of this unwelcome intrusion. That's the first part that I see. I look at, conceptualize it as what happens during the period of invasion. when you're invaded by COVID-19, or you're invaded by another group of people, or you're a group of people invading the space of other, four-legged or whatever, so this happens all the time. What happens then when the invasion occurs? Generally, it can be a very benign, meeting, or it can be one that is very toxic and harmful, in which I do in a model, I call it a period of contamination, where there are toxic and harmful contact and interactions between two groups of people or different species, and so on. It would be like any of us invading a patch of ground where there was a lot of poison ivy.
Mm-hmm.
And, we would be repelled by that, because it would be toxic to us as the one who's doing the colonizing, right? So in humans, it's kind of been quite the reverse with indigenous people. There was a, unwelcome intrusion from Europeans, and of course, toxic and harmful interactions, and contact that happened. And pretty soon, diseases, war, genocide, all these things spread. And if we stay with the idea that it's biological, then we can think about disease, where after the contamination period, infection sets in. Just like I said, COVID-19. Our immune system, at that time was overwhelmed by the different, I think 93, I just finishing writing a paper about 93 different European diseases that came here, overwhelmed the immunity of indigenous people all the way up and down Turtle Island, all the way down to South and Central America, and death and sickness set in. So we see those big numbers, people's immunity overwhelmed, death and sickness sets in. And then you move to a period then of what is really actually the colonization. So those two, it's really difficult to talk about colonization without talking about invasion, contamination, and infection. So as we get to the stage of colonization, let's say COVID-19 colonizes us, or chickenpox colonizes us, we'll say, or the ideas and the beliefs and the values of invading people colonize us. So what happens at that stage is that those of us that survive the first three stages of being colonized, taking the ideas, the beliefs, the values, and the practices, and so on, then those things, once we survive those and we're doing all those things, they become part of our lives. So then those ideas, those beliefs, just like COVID-19 has colonized people, or like chickenpox has colonized people, we are no longer overwhelmed, and we can function and we can thrive within this colonial state. And that's what colonization is all about. So then we have to look at decolonization. What does that mean to me? Well, decolonization is then thinking about any of that colonization that remains that is detrimental to us, right? Our lifestyle, our way of living. I use, in the colonization model, I use the invasion of, let's say folks who come and they introduce refined, white flours and sugars, and then contaminates us because we get away from eating what we eat. We get infected by that, our systems are overwhelmed, then we end up with diabetes. Mm-hmm. So then, the colonization period happens then when we are diabetic. We're not going to die from diabetes because we can get insulin. So rather than go back to ancestral ways of living, we take insulin, and so we can continue to be colonized by that food, right, and by that lifestyle. So decolonization then is about how do we strip away. There's a cleansing period in decolonization. That's how I see it. There's a cleansing period. That's the first part. Stripping away of harmful, invasive thoughts, practices, all these values and beliefs that have been imposed by colonizing structures, right? And then we have to kind of figure out what those are. Then we move down to a period of Renaissance. The Renaissance period in decolonization really, to me, is this restoration of cultural practices. I know that your group is well into that, your organization. You're restoring, cultural practices, thinking and beliefs and values that were taken away or abandoned during the period of colonization, but they're relevant and necessary to survival and well-being. So that's the next piece, cleansing, then Renaissance. But then the final piece of decolonization for me that I talk about in some of my work is the birth and the use of new ideas, thinking and technologies and lifestyles that contribute to the advancement of Indigenous people, empower Indigenous people. So the Enlightenment period can be, how do we how do we draw from settler society ideas, thinking, beliefs, even technologies like we're using right now, like Zoom technology to talk to all these people. How do we use those and enlighten ourselves to use these different kinds of ideas that, or give birth to them, or use these ones that are being developed to give us some higher level of empowerment, right? So that's kind of what decolonization means to me. It's like a threefold process: cleansing, then there's a renaissance, and there's the enlightenment period. So,
Yeah,
in order to get to that, though,
that's awesome. I
yeah.
love how you break it down like that. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this and take notes. So, like, when did that term, start? Kind of like, what's the history of that term, decolonization?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of people don't think about decolonization other than being a political term, because it's been a political term for a while. I think I read somewhere back, it was like in the mid 1800s that the term was being used as a political term, right? Where it's where a place or a people or a system becomes removed from a colonial status, right? And the colonial status or colonial bondage or the colonial control that people are trying to break away from. So, it's when you think about that, so we have to really be careful about, decolonization, because colonization happens all the time. It's not just where Europeans came over here and colonized us. We were colonizing, the space of different animals, and animals colonize the space of other animals, and bees colonize, flowers colonize bees, those kinds of things. So colonization is just kind of a really active thing, right? And that's how we evolve as different species, is that sometimes, well, if you look at the research, the medical research and the research on viruses, that we exist today because viruses shaped us as human beings. They changed, different things about us. They colonized us, and we're colonized by viruses and bacteria right now. All these
and recolonize sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got this great circle of life in us, right? That we hardly ever think about. We just think on the outside. But that's part of the healthy colonization, or is that after so many periods and so many generations, iterations of living a particular way, we were, our bodies got adjusted to a certain amount of movement, certain kinds of food, levels of fiber, so much sunshine for our vitamin D, eating organ meats, from animals, but not drinking sodas or fried bread and all these kinds of things, right? Those are called mismatch diseases or evolutionary traps that we've kind of got into now because we don't live like our ancestors lived. Very, very, very few of us do, because it's changed so much. So the term has been political in that, and that's the way a lot of people treat it. So my work has kind of been around focusing on decolonization, from a number of different points. How do we decolonize at these different levels, right? So decolonization can happen not only in your ideas and your thinking, but we've written about it now, and I've talked about it and presented on now. It can happen at the molecular level. Molecular structures can actually change when you change how you sleep. Whether or not you sit in a hot sauna, at 170, 180 degrees 4 times a week for 20 minutes can begin to change, the expression of what they call heat shock proteins in your cells that send out additional messages that raise the level of bioenergetic stress, mild stress, which our people did. I was just outside. It's like, I don't know how cold it is outside, but I was outside with no shirt on, walking around for a while. Why? That's what our people did. We couldn't turn up our dials to 70 degrees. And when you look at your genetics, like a lot of us, if you ever do genetic testing on yourself, you're going to find and I found that I have a number of genes that would be passed down from my ancestors. One of them, a major one, is called a hunter-gatherer gene that I have. There's so many genes that I have for obesity, but I don't suffer from obesity. But that obesity gene was there for a particular reason. my body was, colonized by this idea that my people came from periods of starvation, like all of our people did.
Mm-hmm.
So those of us who could pack on, the extra weight, we're going to survive the next famine.
Mm-hmm.
But today we live in a settler society where we have ad libitum eating as much as we want, snacking as much as we want. Our bodies are still in that Paleolithic, our old ancestral indigenous life where we say, I'm going to have some extra food because we don't know when the starvation is going to come. We're not thinking that up here, but our cells, our bodies, our molecular structures are thinking like that. So that's where, when I think about decolonization, I have to think about, like, where is it happening? So we've been decolonized at a molecular, cellular, enzymatic levels, by living the lifestyle we live that isn't like our ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Awesome. I love that. So I know, a lot of your work as well focuses on neurodecolonization. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. It's an interesting term that I came up with some years ago. I got really interested in the brain. I was working with a group out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was a professor, I think, at the University of Kansas at the time. So they invited me because I'd done some writing on colonialism. So they wanted me to talk. They presented to a lot of tribal groups and organizations. So they asked me to come on as a team member, consultant, to talk about my work in colonization. So I did, and I was talking about different ideas and decolonization at the time. One of the guys who was a psychologist who was with the group couldn't make the meeting. So he told me, he says, Mike, he says, he did talks on the brain, right? Youth in the brain, right? And so he said, Mike, I can't make it. Can you do this talk for me? I said, I know nothing about the brain, this is years ago. And he says, oh, you can do it. You're a smart guy. Just do my my PowerPoint, So I'd watched him do it before. Then I did it. I said, okay, I'll try it. I did it. And I got a lot of questions I couldn't answer. So I said, I'll write them down for this guy. But at that point, it piqued my interest because I thought, I've been interested in the brain because I had a background in mental health. And then so at that point, I began to dig in because it was at the time where we were getting a lot of research coming out of the decade of the brain. Bush, President Bush was at the time said, well, let's study the brain because we want to study about Alzheimer's and all the neurodegenerative diseases. How do we make a better brain? So I started reading all that research, and I started digging deeper and deeper into research, and man, I was finding so many interesting things. And then I came upon the ideas like, well, how can I marry neuroscience with decolonization? Because decolonization is like, the idea of getting well and healthy again. Mm-hmm. And then I began to understand how the brain works, the plasticity of the brain. So that was the first thing, was that understanding and liberating the mind from colonization by all these different ways. We have to understand how the brain works. Mm-hmm. What does it do? How does the memory work? What do we do to keep it to be a really healthy brain? What kinds of ways do we stress out? What kinds of ways does colonialism stress our brain out? And so the idea was that if we're going to liberate our minds and free it from colonization and make a healthy brain, then we have to understand, like how the brain works, how it worked with our ancestors, and what kinds of things made them have really healthy brains. Mm. Then I started to find out. Now I'd start doing a lot of digging into the research, all the evidence-based research, and then I start thinking, wow, there's all this trauma that they went through. And how did they deal with it? Because the trauma we experience today, seriously, is nothing compared to what our ancestors dealt with. Today we can, feel bad about, historical trauma, but I think in my own mind that's been overdone. I think our ancestors always had historical trauma. Mm-hmm. They lived through famines, climate change, through war, through disease, major stuff, right? I mean, kids in the tribe, number of their infant mortality was super high. Mm-hmm. And there was all kinds of threats that lived in the world at that time. So how did they deal with it? A number of really intelligent, beautiful ways. I mean, just one is through ceremony. Mm-hmm. They did ceremony, right? But certain kinds of ceremony that incorporated the use of the mind and training the mind to focus. right? And that became now mindfulness. But it's
Mhm.
really, that's really the contemplative practice of indigenous people. When one begins to train their mind and they begin to center the focus on, they change how the brain expresses itself. In fact, what happens then is that it begins to bring down particular kinds of neurochemistry in the brain. Things like cortisol and all those adrenaline-like factors begin to quiet down. When you're sitting in ceremony and you're activating the hope and you're feeling good about that, then you begin to activate things like your dopamine levels go up, your reward chemicals, serotonin, relaxation goes up, right? Your left prefrontal cortex, I've used that in some of my presentations, where I look at someone in ceremony and understand that if a person is feeling helpful or feeling hopeful in a ceremony, they're feeling good, the left prefrontal cortex begins to activate, which then sends other messages to the body, which then the body begins the thrive messages that go all along the particular pathways, all the way down to the cells. When people fast, our people fasted a lot. Not just like, well, I'm going to go to Sundance and fast this weekend. Now, these folks were fasting all the time because they were dealing with starvation. So we developed not only genetic variants for that, we also developed neural pathways for that, and we developed ways to protect our health and well-being. Whenever famines came around, our metabolisms would slow down, our bodies. Then we would engage into a lot more sharing, a lot more community. And what was really interesting about that, I found some research that shows when indigenous people were going through starvation, not starvation, let's say they were going for about maybe 4 days without food, they kept up what they were doing. They did ceremony, they danced, they got quiet, but they also laughed a lot. Good sense of humor. Well, what happens? When you laugh, it raises what they call brain-derived neurotrophic factor in your brain. It's a factor that causes neurons to grow in your brain, which makes perfect sense. If you grow more neurons, you get smarter, you're more able to, call in the spirits, you're more able to hunt, you're more able to see those things. And so then it increased things like endocannabinoids in the brain. Well, endocannabinoids are kind of the natural opioid. They take away the pain. They increase your sense of, of well-being too. So it's easier to laugh on an empty stomach. It's easier to laugh when you haven't eaten, when you're sitting there with all your relatives, right? Making jokes about whatever it is. So these are the things that are part of neurodecolonization, is that when we begin to decolonize our mind from some of the beliefs that, there's only one way to do things, and that's this European or American way to do things. But if we go back to the wisdom of our ancestors, we say, wow, why did these folks challenge their children, to do things that were difficult, to fast, to sit in hot sweat lodges, to go without food, or to go do ceremony, or to do a lot of physical things, right? Well, because what they were doing actually was they were creating they were making them tough, we'll say, making them tough.
Yeah.
But we know the research now, what happens is that they create within them a mild bioenergetic stress to the cells. We know now from all the Western science that cells have plasticity, just like the brain does. Cells can change just like our genes can. Our brain can change. Our molecular structures can change. We have all this plasticity. We can change at any time. So they would train these young people through these rites of passage. And again, I'm not just talking about a weekend thing. They're training these kids for years to be tough. So now we know from Western science and brain imaging that these things that folks were doing were creating what they call cognitive resilience. We can even see it light up in the brain now when someone is exhibiting resilience against something that's difficult. We can actually look at those brain images. So our ancestors knew. See, those were they weren't secrets. These were just everyday life kind of things, right? Now Western science is digging these up, and they're saying it's novel information, right? We had this wisdom for such a long period of time. So that's the idea, is that, when we're neurodecolonization really then is about how do you get the brain and the body all the way down to the molecular structure and cellular structure to decolonize the colonized pieces. Because here's one thing, Jillian, is that when you are under chronic stress and you're feeling the racism, or if you're sitting around, I shouldn't say sitting around, if you are thinking a lot and ruminating a lot about boarding schools and how bad we had it, that shortens the telomeres at the end of your chromosomes. That is not good. Yeah. That's why positive thinking is like, okay, that happened to us. All right, so what? Let me count coup on that, right?
Yes.
Let me count coup on that. Let me move beyond that. Let me laugh. Let me be strong. Let me do my ceremonies. Let me plant my garden. Let me be with my relatives. Let me do these things, right? Let me fast. Those kinds of things can begin to decolonize us at those molecular and cellular levels. Like at the cellular level, I said, when you sit in a hot sauna, or like I was outside without my shirt on, it's cold outside, and my wife pulls up and the kids pull up and they're laughing, right? But I do this every now and then, so they're getting used to my crazy behavior.
Yeah.
We know that when we get into these cold environments, like a lot of tribes did, they go sit in these cold places, in these cold waters, and they did ceremony in really hot places. We know that what happens is they increase their levels of heat shock proteins, which are in their cells, which are a sign of longevity and well-being, skeletal muscular longevity, right? So they did these things in ceremony because they knew this would toughen them up, right? Now today we look at it and say, well, it's an energetic stress that we do, that they did with kids. We don't do that, and that's probably why we're softer, we're more vulnerable to stress and anxiety and trauma. We're not tough like our ancestors used to be, you know, and that's what we have to get back to. So we can decolonize at that level, and our genes can express if we do those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Maybe that's why I'm so smart, because I laugh so much. No, just kidding.
Oh, that is good. I mean, laughter is, you know, it's really, some of the studies I've done, I haven't done these studies, I've looked at the research that's been done in cultural neuroscience, and I know that Indians have a funny bone gene, right?
Yeah.
Which I call it. We love to laugh, and when you look at it, there's a particular gene called the serotonin transporter gene that shows up in greater frequencies among collectivist cultures. That research has been done by, what's her name? Joan Chiao at the Northwestern University, or the University of Chicago. Done that research, looked at all these populations around the world and found out these folks who have this particular gene, the serotonin transporter gene, or the 5-HTT-LPR gene, laugh more. They love to tease more. They joke more. They smile more, right? And these are people that, you know, do well in an environment like that. When you bring in colonized ideas of how the environment should only be serious, it should only be this and that kind of thing, shouldn't be laughter, those kinds of things, then that's colonization of that particular genetic variant that you have. It's colonization of your humor. It's colonization of your well-being. Decolonization is about letting yourself laugh and practicing your cultural humor, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't, and people like indigenous people that don't have that gene activated, that's quieted down in very, very serious kinds of situations, don't do well.
Yeah.
They don't do well. And that's why kids in boarding schools probably didn't do well. And that's why today, if you have people who are running agencies or whatever that don't have a good sense of humor, people are not going to feel well in the agency or the program. So there's a lot of different genes that we have actually inherited from our ancestors that we have been inactivated by the colonizing, you know, beliefs and lifestyles of settler society.
Yeah, I love that. You know, we do a training that we call Wellness in the Workplace, and mainly we developed that because of all of the unhealthy workplaces, you know, that we experienced across Indian country. But one of my like informal assessments that I do is if I hear laughter in a workplace, right? If I don't hear laughter, like that says something about the workplace, right? So, yeah, yeah, I love this. So, one of the things that I have been seeing, and I know people are experiencing, you know, pandemic fatigue and politics fatigue, like all this kind of stuff. But what advice or guidance would you give to people who like they're learning about colonization, like maybe for the first time, right? And they're just really mad about the stuff that happened to our people. And they're angry and even rageful, right? And they just want to act out in these angry and rageful ways. And they just kind of like stay in that state. Like what kind of, guidance would you offer to people that might find themselves in that situation?
Yeah. So another big question. Well, there's so many ways to answer that question. First, I'll start with a genetic response, right? Some of us are more activated by stress and trauma. We have gene variants that activate for that, right? That make us more susceptible to maybe emotional, things, to emotional responses and feelings. There are particular genes that some of us carry. There's one called ADRA2B, ADR2 lowercase b. That particular gene expresses for negative thinking behavior, which can involve, rage and anger and those kinds of things. It also is one that increases what they call our vividness of a trauma or of an experience, right? So it's those of us who have that particular gene can experience trauma much differently. Mm-hmm. And it can create either sort of a sense of anxiety and depression, or it can create a sense of rage or of anger and those kinds of things. It's very complex because genes are interacting all the time, right? And they're interacting for different reasons. I'm sure I have that particular gene because it's also one that is about being alert and aware of danger, right? Mm-hmm. And so probably some of my ancestors that passed it down were probably pretty good scouts, right? They'd look out for danger or for wild animals or enemy tribes or whatever. They're always looking out. So I inherited that particular gene. If I don't pay attention to that gene, then it takes over my emotional state, right? And so that's one way to look at anger and rage, is that it's not one size fits all. Mm-hmm. Some people have different genetic variants that have an interplay together that are going to make that can possibly create a much more a bigger response, right? What does that then? Environment does that. Environment activates those genes most of the time, right? So they say, environment is about 80% responsible, 20% genes. But when you bring those together and you bring people into a negative environment, right? Then you're going to increase the probability of more anger and rage and frustration, those kinds of things. So that's one way to look at it. There's another way they look at types and genes. There are people now they've looked at sensitivity to those kinds of things. How sensitive are you to the fact that your parents went to boarding school and they got the hell beat out of them and lost your language? Some people, say you've got one group of people over here. It's not really just a binary either. There's people in between, but there's people that say, you know what? Like my mom, she's like 93 years old. Yeah, I went through that. She had a hell of a life, but she can still laugh. And I'll say, Mom, aren't you mad about that stuff? Yeah, it got me upset, but you know what? You got to go on. You can't think about that stuff. And then she laughs and she jokes, she tells stories. She's, her thing that's going the longest, the last 4 years has been Donald Trump, right? She's like engaged in those kinds of things, right? She's got every reason to be angry about those things. Okay, that's one thing, right? So then I did her genetic DNA analysis. I found out she's got what they call a COMT gene, COMT. She's got two variants of the warrior gene. My mom is a warrior. She's not like a warrior to go out and kill people, but she is a warrior with her emotions. Yeah. She's a warrior with her humor. She's a warrior in not talking bad about people. She's a warrior in her prayer and her positive thinking. And that particular gene, that COMT gene, I think she got a TT variant, which is the gold standard, right? She also has a very high placebo effect, meaning that she believes in her prayer. She believes in the power of good. She believes in those things. So she's got that all going for her, right? Me, on the other hand, I get angry, I get upset, I get depressed, anxiety. Not all the time. I got really good control of it. So I got half of my dad's gene, right? And I got half of my mom's gene. So I understand that. So it's not one size fits all. We have to really pay attention to who we are as individuals. And then there's the idea that someone would call my mom a dandelion, right? Because like the dandelions, there's the sensitivity. She's sensitive to people, but she's not sensitive to negativity. She's sensitive to these other things. So a dandelion, you can dig it up, it'll come back next year. You can napalm it, it'll come back next year. And then there's the one they call the orchid people. The orchids are the very fragile people, like, oh, you know, I get so hurt when I think about my people in boarding school. I get so hurt when I hear about bad news or whatever. You know, I'm not saying one is better than the other. They both have their strengths. The dandelion people are going to come back. They're going to have resilience no matter what, right? They're going to walk to the boarding school and say, is that all you got? The tulip kids, the tulip kids are going to come out and they're going to say, that was terrible. You know, I wanted to commit suicide and, you know, I just kept on drinking, or those kinds of things. Now, the thing about the tulip kids is they have this tremendous, from the studies, they have tremendous abilities, artistic, intellectual, sensitivity. They're artists, they're painters, they're poets, they're musicians. They're very sensitive, right? But they're also very fragile, that they're maybe more likely the people to commit suicide, more likely people to harm themselves or to isolate or to get into very deep levels of depression. Right. So that's why it's difficult to answer, like when people have these anger things, right? We have to understand it's complex. But what seems to mediate a lot of that, Jillene, is collectivism. When you have people around you that are positive, keep only positive people within your radius, in your orbit, and make sure you're positive and laugh, right? These are things that mediate anger, rage, and frustration. The last thing I'm going to say is this: even though I said for some people it's more difficult than to not do that than it is for others, I'm going to tell you it's a waste of time, because of the plasticity of the brain and the cells. The more negativity we pump into it, the more the brain takes that in and changes the neural networks to make sure that you are really damn good at being negative and being angry. Yeah. This is the right chemistry for that, the right conditions every time, set it off. So that's why positivity, and what we did as Indigenous people, we did our ceremonies, we got rid of it. Someone died, did our ceremony, we had our mourning time, we got rid of it. Yeah. We had, you know, we lost someone in a battle, we did our dances, we grieved, we got rid of it, right? That was the idea. We did not feed those pathways of despair. We did not feed those pathways of anger. You know, instead, we knew that we had to wake up the next day because there were more things in front of us. And that's where resilience comes from. It comes from practicing those things. And again, not just on a like, I'm going to do it on the weekend or do a seminar or a webinar. Yeah. It's every day, all the time.
A way of life, right?
It is. Yep.
A way of life. Well, I mean, that's really kind of like the spirit behind the Native Wellness Power Hours. So we knew that this pandemic would be challenging on our communities, and we wanted to do our part. We wanted to contribute and do our part, you know, and so we had a meeting and we brainstormed and we came up with the Native Wellness Power Hours. And so 1 hour every day, that to kind of serve as that anchor for some people, right? To tune in and to hear uplifting messages, to hear a concert or comedy or poetry, or watch a cooking demonstration or a workshop or a panel, you know, all these different kind of things that we've been doing is to trying to counter, you know, mitigate some of the other stuff that people are going through. So that feels good that, you know, that we're able to contribute that, right? So thank you. I think that was really helpful. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, I know we only have like 15 minutes left or so, but you know, tomorrow is the Thanksgiving holiday. And like I said at the beginning, many people have different views on that. For myself and my family, we choose to, you know, focus on gratitude, right? Like, and that's what we'll be doing tomorrow. And through Zoom, we're gonna play bingo through Zoom with our family all over the place. So that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow. But what are your thoughts about gratitude, and what are some of the ways that that you bring gratitude into your life?
Yeah, gratitude, has been studied. It's one of those emotions and one of the traits that people have, and a lot of the all cultures practice gratitude. I'd even it's it extends beyond human beings into the other forms of life. So gratitude is just an understanding, of course, that there's something to be thankful for, and making that connection to whatever it is, that source of life, that source of energy that we get, and I think that's what gratitude is, really is that connection to that feeling, right? And in order to, a lot of times, to reach that connection, we have to quiet ourselves, and we have to sometimes move into that place where we can experience that gratitude more fully. The sun, for example, right? What does the sun do? Well, the sun gives us, light, helps crops grow and stuff. Interestingly enough, it gives us vitamin D when we stand in the sun, which then puts in motion, all these other factors in the body that make us feel good and help us live longer. So it's something that, tribal people all around the world have done for, eons. Who knows how long people have been practicing gratitude. All contemporary research, the neuroscience research, shows that the practice of gratitude, raises a number of good chemistry in the body. Things I've been talking about, endocannabinoids, brain-derived neurotrophic factors, raises your levels of serotonin. You feel more relaxed, more at peace. It's a reward when you're practicing gratitude, so your dopamine levels go up. So it gives the body a sense of thrive, right? Where if you're angry and you think nothing is out there helping you, your body gets the idea of decay, which puts into motion all these other systems of inflammation and disease, promoting functions in the body, right? So that's the idea. So there's a lot of good science behind it. There's a lot of good cultural and historical evidence that people have done for long periods of time. So the idea of gratitude, though, what seems to work the best, I've done, again, looked at the brain and looked at neurotheology and some of the research in there. If you're giving gratitude to God, for example, right, which some people do, what works the best, seems to work the best for people, is people who have a connection with a God that is an all-loving God, or all-loving higher power that says, love everything. Love that tree, love that land, love that water, love all these people, love that sky, love yourself. And that's this higher power. And the idea behind that is that, is that it makes us feel really secure, right? And really accepted. So what happens in that part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex is that there's an activation in that part of the brain of compassion for yourself and others. So when you look at indigenous cultures around the world, especially indigenous here, people on Turtle Island, we never had such a thing as hell or a place forever suffering. So when you believe in a God or higher power, your gratitude, as you're saying, I have to give gratitude to God, otherwise God's going to throw me in hell and burn my ass forever, right?
Yeah.
That's, and I'm going to be there forever in hell, right? I'm not saying people don't have to believe that, but I'm saying what the science shows is that people who believe in a God that's critical, that is like always watching you, think, oh, marking my sheet, you did something wrong, or distant, that stays back and doesn't get involved, or a God that is about retribution. Boy, when you're done, you're really going to get it, kind of thing. Which actually in the United States represents close to 80% of the people believe in that kind of God. There's only probably 20% or less of the people that believe in a benevolent, loving, higher power. And that gets back then to indigenous people. Indigenous people didn't believe about a distant God or critical God or an authoritarian God. They believed in the goodness, the great spirit, the great mystery, and all this. So gratitude from that point of view is going to be supercharged. You're going to get a lot more gratitude out of understanding that if you have a conversation with the sun, the moon, the stars, with a higher power, with the trees, whatever it is, that they love you like you love them, your gratitude is going to be exponentially rewarded with, not only, that feeling, but also the chemistry that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So what do I do? I do that. I mean, I practice having gratitude with that in mind, that, you know, I accept those things and all those things accept me every day. I'm always thankful for what I do. I mean, I work out every day. I eat well every day, even when I don't eat well, and when I fast and whatever. There's a meditation that I practice it's a single pointed meditation that Thich Nhat Hanh teaches. And there's one of the iterations of that is that it's about smile, right? So you smile when you do the meditation. So as he talks about it, you smile at all your troubles, all your challenges. Nothing is more important than your gratitude or your peace, right? And your joy. Even hard times, you smile at those things. So that got me back to thinking about how a lot of times Indigenous people would laugh at, you know, hard times or whatever. And then the ability to release those things, right? That you feel are holding you back, or to accept them. So that kind of meditation I do every day.
Yeah.
You know, I do that every day to kind of supercharge my gratitude.
Nice.
So and I spend most of my time, because I've been doing meditation for so many years and so long, in the form of what I call mindful decolonization, is that I've trained my brain to stay right in the here and now. I don't think about the past trauma I was through, you know, for many years. That kind of visited me off and on. And after a while of many years of meditation and training my brain and my mind, it's just there. It doesn't have, it's just there like any thought would be. Kind of wheels in, then it wheels out.
Yeah.
And then I get a much bigger ability to focus on what's here and now. So if it's a joke, I can laugh 10 times as hard as I can, right? Or
Yeah.
if it's a hug I get from, you know, a relative, or a smile or whatever it is, I can enjoy it much more. So I think that's what I think about gratitude, is that it has these different aspects to it, but it's important for us to be able to do that kind of thing. And again, think about how our brains are, and again, to have the right setup for gratitude. Don't, you know, say, you know, I have to do this gratitude because, because I have to do it, or because,
Yeah.
God is going to punish me if I don't, you know, say thank you or something, right? That's the idea. But so that, you know, and maybe that's why, you know, Indigenous people, their language sometimes, you know, there weren't, I don't know if there are terms like gratitude in there, because it was such a natural part of their life that they didn't have to define it, you know, or operationalize it. They just did it, right? So.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things, people that come to eat dinner at our house, or pre-pandemic anyway, for our blessing for our meal, we just go around and everybody shares what they're grateful for. You know, maybe it's one thing, maybe it's 10 things or whatever, but we've been doing it. When we first started, my kids were small, and they would say, I'm thankful for my fork, or I'm thankful for the salt and pepper, or, you know, and then as we got more used to it, and that became our daily practice, or every meal, then they say like more deep and meaningful things. It's just awesome to hear. And then when other people come to our house to eat, you can tell the people that are uncomfortable by that, you know, saying things that they're grateful for out loud, but in the end, like they enjoy it, you know. And so I just wanted to share that, because maybe that will be a practice you can start tomorrow, you know, on this holiday of giving thanks. And that's why, you know, I shared my family, you know, there's many tribes who call it the National Day of Mourning, right? Or there's people that focus on that. And, you know, all across the spectrum, people have different thoughts about this holiday. And what we choose to focus on, you know, family gratitude and gathering. Tomorrow we're going to gather virtually, you know, and play games and just have fun. So, and contribute to this collective, you know, day of thanks and gratitude. So thank you for sharing that. So we just have a few more minutes. I just wanted to ask, so the people that are tuning in today that want to learn more about neurodecolonization, or decolonization of their own minds, I really look at it as healing. I think that healing is decolonization, right? And so we kind of like really focus on that word, on healing. And then, indigenizing our minds so that we can indigenize our behaviors, like think and act more like our ancestors did. So for the people that are tuning in, that this might be all new to them, or what are some resources that people could read or look up or to kind of dig in deeper about for their learning?
There's a lot of good stuff written on decolonization. Here's one of my new books. So come out, and so you can search the term decolonization. There's a lot of things that are being about it now. If you want to look at decolonization in particular areas, there you can look at decolonization in education and in law and social work and psychology and trauma, decolonizing trauma, those kinds. There's a lot of stuff that's being written these days about decolonization, and folks are talking about it, in different kinds of ways for their different areas of discipline, as well as everyday life. That's what I try to do in my work. I'm trying to finish a book now that I'm talking about in terms of things that people can do every day, and I try to include in there a lot of stuff that is around historical, traditional knowledge and stories and that people have told, but also try to integrate Western science into that too. So indigenous and Western science and knowledge into it. So that, those collections haven't been really written yet, I don't think, but there are bits and pieces out there that people can read. But I think, the most important thing to understand about decolonization is to understand, what our ancestors did. Mm-hmm. What did they do? What did they do in terms of their lifestyle? How did they think? What did they think about, right? Were they negative all the time? How did they sleep, right? What did they do? Something I didn't talk about today, but it's like sleep is really a major, major factor in terms of our well-being. Mm-hmm. And we don't sleep like our ancestors do. Most of us don't get enough sleep, right? Because of these major changes. Do we dance every day, right? Decolonization is a form of dance is a form of decolonization, as is singing. The research shows that dancing and singing are some of the greatest liberators of our from disease and illness, because again, it raises our levels of endocannabinoids, our brain-derived neurotrophic factor, sends signals all throughout our body, and there are these really powerful things that happen to the body, which is why when you look at historical accounts of people coming and meeting white people for the first time, all these, what they did, they were singing late at night, they were dancing, at all hours, they were singing and dancing and sitting around and joking and feasting, and then of course, these are things that I would say we did a book called For Indigenous Eyes Only. It's done 15 years ago, yeah. But there are some areas in there where people can look at it and say, what kinds of things did we do before? What kinds of things aren't we doing? And when you can think about the things you're not doing, like if you're not moving around every day and walking and whatever, even during the pandemic, you can do it. Then you can say, well, I guess my movement is decolonized. If I'm not sleeping well like my ancestors and they slept well, deeply, I guess my sleep is colonized. I guess my humor is colonized. All these different kinds of things they can look at, which are really very sort of universal traits and characteristics among Indigenous people. So I think that's what they can look at first. Is kind of, it's really interesting when you look at the history. This summer I just finished reading a Mandan history of it's called Meeting at the Center of the World, and it was written by Elizabeth Fenn, who was a professor from the University of Boulder, Colorado, and she wrote about the Mandans. But I read this over, and the Mandans are on our reservation, and we're all together, 3 affiliated tribes. And it was fascinating because there are a lot of things I didn't know about the Mandans in terms of how they ate, how they treated one another, how they interacted with other tribes, their ceremonial kinds of stuff. And I'm like, wow, these are things that kept them alive and healthy, right? I mean, they're living in earth lodges, where they just got a fire going. Well, it's 40 below. So how do you deal with that, right? Yeah. So I mean, so there are these things I think around colonization that we have to understand in order to get to decolonization. So yeah, there's a good list of stuff out there too. So
nice, awesome. Okay, last question, 30 seconds. What do you do for your self-care during the pandemic?
Well, I'm in my office right now, which is my garage, and if you can see this here,
Ah, yeah.
a treadmill. This is my weight machine. This is my floor where I do a stretch.
Nice.
This is where I sit. This is my saxophone. I play my saxophone,
Nice.
and you know, I do a lot of stuff, and I just pretty much do what I do. I mean, I intermittent fast every day. I don't eat for 18 to 19 hours every day. I eat pretty much a plant-based diet, and I sleep well. I make sure I sleep well. I exercise. I dance with my daughters. I've got 4 young daughters, so I make them dance with me. If they don't, then I dance with my wife, and they get embarrassed, you know. So, you know, and I sing with them. I sing and listen to music, a lot of music. When I work out, when I go for walks around the neighborhood. But the thing is, the really important thing is laughing, smiling, you know, talking to my daughters, helping them with their homework because they're getting homeschooled because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm the dean of my faculty, so when I have meetings, I'm always joking with my faculty. I don't know if they, you know, they probably haven't been around a dean that does that, but that's what I do. I mean, I love to joke. I love to tell stories. I love to, you know, pull pranks and you know, and tease, those kinds of things. So I continue to be who I am. I'm fairly, I don't hide any part of myself. So sleep well. I can't, and I walk around outside without a shirt till I start shivering. And that's good. It's good because
Yeah.
what it does is it increases your metabolism to the point that you start melting away the white fat that stores on us. You increase the brown fat, I call it indigenous fat, right? And that makes us, you know, leaner and more muscular and healthy. And that's what our ancestors did, you know. They, you know, if they had to run outside, they said, well, I got to put on my, you know, beaver coat and those kind of, no, they didn't. They just took off, ran from one earth lodge to the next and walked over, you know, and they got used to the thing, but we know that. So yeah, sleep, exercise, eating well, and fasting, all those different kinds of things. I haven't got into meditating, and I haven't got into taking ice cold showers yet. That's one thing. If I walk around outside, I want to take my hot shower in the morning, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Nice.
and my wife and I, we play games with our kids. We play Uno. We play cards with them. But every day at about 3 o'clock, like it is right now here, they come out and they meditate with me. My daughters, they meditate with me.
Nice.
So, and we talk about that. So yeah, so I'm just, you know, haven't really changed much in the
Yeah.
pandemic, you know. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those tips, and thank you for being here with us today. My mind is already going, like, I would love to have you come back, and I have a whole nother list of questions going in my brain. But thank you so much for your work. Like, I love your work and reading about your work, and you have inspired me and helped me to be a better human. So thank you. Yeah. And we want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in today. Please share so your family and friends can tune in. Remember, we're taking a break. We want to wish everyone a great holiday for giving thanks. And we hope that if you're by yourself, you still take some time to connect with people. And if you're with your family, we hope that you stay safe as well. We are in a pandemic. The cases are going up. Indian country is still being hit hard. So please be safe. And thank you, Michael. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care.